Welcome, this is Chris Chancey from Amplio Recruiting, and this is the Refugee Workforce podcast. And the whole focus of this podcast is to have very casual conversation about specific issues in relation to refugees being employed by companies here in the US, as well as in Europe. And so we have Seye Onabolu representing Sona Circle with us today, and is such a great asset in terms of the different complexities of hiring refugees in the UK and elsewhere abroad. And so the topic that we have today is one that is probably the one we enjoy talking about the most, but it's a common question that we get. And it is, what are the benefits of hiring refugees? So this is a little bit of a softball question that I get to throw to you today and let you just share on some of the top value that you see refugees bringing to the workforce.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me on your podcast. My name is Seye Onabolu, and I'm the founder and CEO of Sona Circle Refugee Recruitment. We're based in the UK, and we operate in London, Birmingham, and Manchester. This is a very interesting question, and it's one that I will throw back at you, Chris, because it's an area that I think you've expanded on much deeper in your book, The Refugee Workforce. But what I can do is talk about from our perspective of working with employers in the UK and the benefits of hiring refugees. I will repeat a few of the points that I'm sure you've talked about extensively, but I think one key point is diversity. So research and studies have shown that diverse teams and groups and companies perform much better. And at a base level, it's quite logical, because if you have more ideas and insights and experiences, you're more likely to come up with solutions and creative responses to different things that come up in the business. One story I can share on this is actually with the current group of Afghan refugees that we're working with. As a bit of a background, in 2022, there are about 5,000 refugees coming in from Afghanistan, and there will be about 20,000 more coming over the next few years. Now, these are all individuals that have worked with the UK government in Afghanistan in some capacity or another. So we got sent the list of their skills and backgrounds and experiences in order to try to place them in employment and opportunities. And looking at the list was very interesting, not surprising, but the skills and backgrounds of the people that we had on that list, at least 50% of them were jobs like surgeons, politicians, pilots, doctors, engineers, architects. So very highly skilled and qualified people. And then we found there were also others with lower skilled people coming over with spouses, perhaps, who were more homemakers or domestic workers. But this is very interesting, because one question we often get asked by employers and by people in general are, what skills do refugees have? And the simplest answer to that question is all skills and experiences, right from the very top down to the bottom. We've actually placed a number of refugee candidates within quite highly skilled roles, so in consulting firms, in executive positions, and those are. It's always great when we're able to do that, because because you're providing a high level opportunity for an individual, and that they really do deserve, because as Chris, I'm sure you can attest to, the skills and experiences that people have when they come over are very varied, and some of them are very highly skilled individuals. In other cases, it's often important for refugees to take on temporary roles while building up their careers and experience in the country. Perhaps taking new qualifications or their translation exams and things like that. But going back to your question as to the benefits of refugees within society, I think aside from just what they're able to provide to economy and skills in the workforce. Refugees bring a lot of cultural value, whether it's in terms of food, music, art, and this is not to be underestimated. We take for granted a lot of the different cultural influences that have that exist in our cities and our countries, that have been a direct result of people migrating and moving over. I believe the US in itself is actually an incredibly diverse country in terms of influences and backgrounds from all over the world, and quite rich in terms of the different cultural elements that you have. And these are all direct results of people migrating from different parts of the world at different stages to the US. Absolutely. So that's a huge benefit. And I'd say between those two, both the economic, but also the social and cultural elements that refugees are able to bring.
Those are,
I think those are
great.
There.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to argue with those points, and that's really diversity at the core, right? It is exposure to different cultures, backgrounds, beliefs, ways of solving problems that adds value to any team, any corporation, any community. And so we want to champion diversity, and then we write a lot about what is beyond diversity, or what are those elements that we think really hits the bottom line of, your financials, your balance sheet at your company, that are really tangible for you, that really are part of diversity, but maybe even ways that you see this as something you invest in. Because the reality is, for you as a company, what we see is this real process for companies that greatly are impacted in a positive way by hiring refugees. There is this cycle, and essentially it's pretty simple. There's a little bit of an investment on the front end. There's a little bit of a giving on the front end by a company to say, we're going to slightly adjust our processes. We're going to put some other things in place. We're going to tailor a little bit of the onboarding and training and initial effort to this specific group of people. And as we give a little bit, they're going to give a lot. As we create and invest a little bit on the front end, you see this huge loyalty that comes from the refugee workforce. And so when we talk about being dependable and we talk about retention rates, that's where we see the biggest benefit of engaging the refugee workforce, because as a company, we're sitting at 80% retention rates for people in that 3 to 6 month window of time that they're with your company. And it's right at 70% after 1 year. And those rates are double, sometimes triple what we're seeing in various local communities when it comes to the workforce, because it's so challenging to find people who are willing to show up and be ready to work. But you've got a community of people that is the bare minimum expectation that they will bring to the table. Of course, they will be there ready to work on time. Now, beyond that, how do we navigate some of the other hurdles that we know will arise? But we've got a community of people who will be very loyal, very dependable, and you'll see strong retention rates. Some of the other things that we typically point out as well is we talk about substance abuse and how that's such a nominal factor among the refugee population. We drug test every single candidate that comes to our office in preparation for them starting work. And we just went through this exercise again with our team. So in 8 years of running this organization, when we even published the book, we were still at 0. And it sounds like, according to our team in the past year, we finally had one person that did fail a drug test. So we are at 1 out of over 10,000 refugees we've been able to place into the workforce. And so there were some jokes made about that one individual and the reputation they've now set. But largely what you see is a community of people that prioritizes initially this desire to provide for their family, both here and back home, and create an opportunity for themselves and others. And so there's just not, you don't see the standard substance abuse issues that you see across the native-born population. And the last point that I'll hit on in terms of this discussion today is growth mindset. And I think that's one of those that's maybe most often overlooked. But the fact that these individuals have such a strong desire to learn and grow and develop, as much as there's an initial expectation of, let me just do the same job every day and get some stability back in my life, there's a pretty immediate hunger that follows that stability that says, teach me something new. Is there a certificate I can earn? Is there something more that I can do, not only to increase my pay, but to increase the value that I bring to this organization? And I love that. We see it across the board, and it's such an amazing, so it's learning the local language, but it's also learning vocational language. It's learning additional skill sets and training that can be valuable and give them a sense of pride in the work that they do. And so we love seeing that across the board at the clients that we work in. So I hit on several points. Any last comments from you? And then I have one story that I love, that I'd love to close out with. It's just humorous, but it's such a great story to kind of touch on this conversation.
Absolutely, Chris. It's always good to hear your insights on this particular subject. Just one point I will raise, and this is perhaps speaking to more of a UK audience of people that are aware of the UK current situation. Following the Brexit, which happened a few years back, this is essentially UK's moving away from the EU economically. There is currently, I think that coupled with the COVID pandemic, 2020, and it resulted in a large shortage of workers within the hospitality industry. So I'd say at the moment, somewhere between 70 to 75% of the jobs and the roles that we have on our books are within the hospitality industry. There's a huge gap in that market. Even though wages have been increased, almost doubled in many cases, there's still a huge shortage. So what we're finding now is that the refugees candidates are a huge resource. So if you're talking about benefits, being a resource that is ready, available, and as you pointed out, very capable, it's something to be highlighted.
Yeah, so I'll close with a story from one of the companies that we work with. This company is based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, here in the U.S., and they've hired, maybe close to 200 Afghans from us in the past year. And the initial group that we took in to start working at this company, the company had several aspects to their onboarding process and their hiring process, and some of those they've since changed because of how much friction that put in the process of them being able to hire the people that they needed. And we're seeing that from a lot of companies. But in this case, there was an initial math assessment that was given to every employee, and they'd have to pass the assessment to be hired. So we had this first group, I think it was maybe 6 Afghan men who were interviewing with the company. The interview had gone pretty well, and they asked them to step back into a private room for their math assessment. And I thought, oh man, I was really hoping that they would not force these guys to take this test. Not that they're not intelligent people, but reading a math test in English and expecting them to be able to respond to those answers appropriately. I don't know if it's multiple choice or if this is, kind of a show your work math test. And so I'm just bracing myself for having to have a conversation with the company to say, hey, how important is this to their entry-level employment with this company? And so the guys go back in one room together, and a few minutes later they come out and they're all smiling. And I said, hey, how'd it go? And I'm just bracing myself for the response. And one of the guys he was the most fluent in English. He said, there's one thing that Afghans are really good at. And I'm thinking maybe he's going to say math, or maybe he's going to say, some of these other things we've talked about on this podcast so far. And he says, we all pass. And I said, that's awesome. What are Afghans good at? And he says, teamwork, with a huge smile on his face. And so I didn't ask any more questions. Like I said, the company has since removed the math assessment as a priority or prerequisite for employment. But I just think there's something to be said for all these things, right? Retention, growth mindset, diversity, but also just, people who really want work and they want to make it happen and they're willing to work together and be creative to solve problems. And those are people that we want on our teams. And that's why we started these companies. That's why Sona Circle exists. That's why Amplio Recruiting exists, is because we see the value that is overlooked and sidelined most of the time. But if we can help engage them in the workforce, everyone will benefit in the result. And so glad that we get to do that on a daily basis. If you have questions about how we can support your company or your community, we'd love to answer those individually. You can email us or reach out on social media, and we love to respond. Feel free to pick up a copy of Seye's book, Refugees Are Here to Stay. Get used to it. And of course, Refugee Workforce is available on Amazon as well. So thank you for your time and for joining us, Seye. Look forward to continuing to record brief but hopefully insightful episodes for those who are listening in. And we'll talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone.